Teamwork is what makes the sport beautiful. It's all about how smooth you are, how in tune with each other you are. Like you can't go into a bike race or a regatta, rowing, and not be in sync with your teammates, because otherwise you will not perform to the same level. When the summation of the individuals is less than, the result, that's when you've done something great.
Joining us in the studio today is American cyclist who currently competes for the American all-gravel Trek Driftless team. He previously competed as a professional road cyclist between 2008 and 2021. Born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, father, sailor, gravel bike adventurer, racer. Please welcome to the studio, Kiel Reijnen. Kiel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. And in that order, I should say.
The order, you mean father, sailor, gravel bike adventurer. Yeah, you have two kids at home, don't you?
I do. Yeah, 2 and 6, both daughters.
An amazing adventure, I bet, right?
Absolutely. It is opened my eyes in so many ways. I mean, especially having girls, I think, has just been a really amazing experience and a growing experience for me. I wouldn't change anything about it. It's, of course, parenthood. I don't like to sugarcoat it. It doesn't need to be for everyone. But it is, challenging. It's hard. It pushes you. But it's also, in its beautiful moments, it's the most beautiful thing that I've done personally. So this year, a lot of my transition from road to gravel was about having more time and space to be a parent, and to be involved with my kids. So yeah, it's been a really good shift, for my wife and I, that a little bit of that role reversal and kind of appreciating what each other have contributed prior and mixing it up.
Cool. Well, Kiel, for our listeners that don't know much about you or your background, I'm curious to know, let's just start from the beginning and share, where were you born and where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I was born in Port Townsend, Washington, just out on the peninsula from the island where I live. I live on Bainbridge Island, which is where I was raised and spent my whole life. Most of my family lives in the area. I have cousins and aunts and uncles in Port Townsend still, but also kind of scattered around the islands here. There are a staggering number of small little islands in this area, and so you can be quite close. Sometimes only 3-4 miles away as the crow flies, but it could take hours to get to that place. Within the same county, even. Yeah. Due to this sort of complicated waterways and fjords and ferry boats. So this is where I've spent, my whole life, other than traveling around and racing, and a bit of time in Boulder, where I was in school at CU. So this is definitely home.
Tell me, as a kid growing up, what were some of the things that you were into, either sports or activity-wise?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, we just had the run of the island. It felt like a Robinson Crusoe type existence. And there's a Wes Anderson film, Moonrise Kingdom.
Sure.
That film, I reference that sometimes because, of course, people have seen it, and that's a lot of what my childhood felt like. The island, of course, is busier now than when I was a kid, and more people have moved here, and there's more ferry boats, and they go later at night and earlier in the morning. But a lot of things have remained the same, and I, of course, cherish sharing with my kids things that I grew up with and appreciate as a child. Getting to share those things with them and watch them experience those things is super special. So I actually live next door to my parents, and about a quarter of a mile down the road from the house I grew up in.
Wow. That's incredible.
It says a lot about how I feel about this place. And I grew up rowing in high school, played soccer and sailing before that. Rowing was kind of the first foray for me into a sport where I could aspire to be an Olympic level athlete. And I relished that. I don't quite know why. I don't think my 15-year-old, 16-year-old self could explain exactly what the appeal was, but it was hard. And we had a tough coach, and it made me a better athlete. I responded well to it, and I got hungry. And unfortunately, at the time, I wasn't growing any bigger, and so I was trying to keep up with guys that were 5-6 inches taller than myself, and 20 to 60 pounds more. And eventually, I realized it was going to be really tough to make it as far as I wanted to in the sport with the size I was. And I'd been riding my bike around the island to practice, to school, to home for lunch. And one of the folks at the local bike shop, the head mechanic, Paul Johnson, who now owns the shop, Classic Cycle, noticed that. And he asked my friend and I, who I rode crew with, do you guys want to come over to Seattle sometime and try out a local crit and see what that's about? And so we wandered over on the ferry and went over to the Seward Park Crit in Seattle. And there's only 3 races. They're very mixed level races, and jumped into the what was essentially the Cat 4-5 adult race. And I think I probably made it halfway before I got dropped, lapped, threw up, and fell in love. It was a challenge, and I liked that. And the more I pursued it, the more doors opened. So I just kept chasing it.
So in that first race, you got dropped, you bonked, and you still fell in love with it.
Yeah. It says something about my 16-year-old self.
I'm curious, back to your rowing earlier though, did you have desires as a rower to go to the Olympics? Yeah.
So, some people go out and fish to enjoy fishing, right? Catch and release, whether that's fly fishing in a river or fishing out here in the Salish Sea. Other people go out to fish because they want the fish on their dinner table. And I'm of the latter category. I like crabbing, but I'm catching crab so that I can eat crab. And rowing was the same for me. I liked rowing. I loved rowing, but I was using rowing to go to the Olympics in my head. Right. Of course, I didn't. I moved on to cycling, but it was a means to an end for me. And cycling, as much as I'm passionate about it, I think you could say the same thing. It was a vehicle for me to get as far as I wanted to in sport. And it's not that I didn't appreciate the journey along the way, and still do. It's just that for me, it was a means to an end. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back to your parents. So what did your parents do then, or what do they do now?
So my mom owned a clothing store before I was born. And she grew up also on the peninsula here. She grew up in Port Townsend. And she owned that clothing store with her sister. And shortly after I was born, they sold the clothing store. And my dad owns a construction company, high-end residential homes here on Bainbridge and around the peninsula, sometimes in the San Juans, but all relatively local builds. And he's done that since he was in his 20s and still is today.
Nice. So you grew up, you eventually, attended university. You've got a pretty cool technical university background as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I studied mechanical engineering at Boulder, University of Colorado in Boulder. And I did a year actually at UW here in Seattle first, and I sort of alluded to it earlier. I love where I live, and I wasn't ready to leave home. So between training and that sort of desire to stay close to home, I did my first year just in Seattle at UW, and I actually commuted from the island. The dorms were a real struggle for me. I just didn't find it a conducive environment to being an athlete, and so it was a juggling act. Most of my balance of athletics and education were both were important to me, and certainly for my family, I had incredible support from my parents, but there was definitely an ask that I continue my education as I pursued this.
Yeah. Can you see yourself pivoting at some point into mechanical engineering or the engineering field?
Yeah, I can, but maybe not so directly. It's already served me really well to have that background. whether it was, like early on in my career, I remember at a Jelly Belly team camp, some engineers from the bike brand we were sponsored by at the time came by, and they were showing some fundamental element analysis, what would you call it, diagrams, I guess, of the frame, under different amounts of torsion load at the bottom bracket. And, I think that for them, they were showing that kind of as like, hey, we're using science. But they didn't expect the riders to really understand or do anything with that information. But of course, I knew exactly what it was showing. And so I was able to kind of talk with them about that. And I realized, I think early on in my career, like, oh, this is going to be useful. And it remained useful. As my career progressed, I got to have sort of more meaningful and intimate conversations with partners for the various teams I rode for, because I was able to speak the language. And I think that that's helpful both ways, right? It means that, maybe together we're creating a better product that has a better end user experience, because you can really harness the power of that R&D through the team, when you have guys, racers that understand how the science translates to the use.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, even I think about our brand portfolio, and we benefit from riders like you all the time, because you can speak really intelligently about the performance of the product in a way that someone without that background might not be able to articulate.
Yeah, and it's a powerful tool. So I'm really glad I have the background there, and I think it's been useful both ways.
Yeah. Let me just throw this out there. Okay. If you weren't a cyclist, what all other career path, like if you could define your own job description, what would you like to do?
I am someone who, given the choice between having someone else fix it or figuring out how to fix it myself, will always fix it myself. And so that's resulted in me pursuing way too many different hobbies, and sometimes spreading myself too thin. It also bothers me when people are sort of mediocre at everything and good at nothing, but I keep sort of pushing myself that direction, because I'm always hungry for the kind of the next thing to learn about. And whether that's the diesel engine on my boat that I started taking apart a few months ago, or the, rototilling my front yard so that I could grade it and regrass it, or, building our house. I really like doing stuff. And so I continually kind of estimate the amount of time and effort and bandwidth I have for those things. But I do come out the other side, I think, a more well-rounded person.
Yeah. Cool. All right, we're going to shift gears now, or change gears, to the sprint section of the podcast, where I throw a bunch of this or that questions at you, and we see what you really like and don't like. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
Beer or wine?
Beer.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Tacos or burritos?
Tacos.
Spicy or mild?
Definitely mild. Pacific Northwest
Cold?
mild.
Oh, yeah. Cold weather or hot weather?
Oh, hot drinks, cold weather.
Okay. Rain or snow?
Rain, definitely.
The mountains or the beach?
The beach, but it can't be one of those picturesque, white sand beaches. It needs to be kind of like rocky, covered in barnacles, inaccessible.
Big cities or quiet suburbs?
I will raise you quiet wilderness.
Okay, I like it. Maybe I might have to modify that question. Cars or trucks?
Boats.
Boats. Damn, you did it again. Pavement or dirt?
Dirt.
Gloves or gloveless?
Gloveless. Yeah.
Clipped in or flats?
Clipped in.
Low pressure or high pressure?
Low pressure, but I have to work on that. That's like it's so ingrained as a road cyclist to want to overinflate. So that's one of those things where you just they constantly working on being a better person. I'm constantly working on putting less pressure in the tires.
It's hard. It's hard, right? Last question, and I think our listeners know the answer to this already, but fix it yourself or take it to a mechanic.
Yeah, fix it yourself every time because you'll there'll be some curse words and you'll throw some things at the object, but you'll come out the side with knowledge you didn't have.
Yeah, cool. All right, changing gears again. So let's talk about cycling more specifically. So, you went from rowing to cycling, and you sort of built your education and environment around training more. Tell us about the on-ramp to professional cycling. What was that transition like? How did it happen?
Yeah, so I think I sort of alluded to it, but as I started riding more and rowing less, doors just kept opening. And again, I was using cycling as a means to an end. So as soon as I kind of latched onto it, the goal was always, how far can I get with this? And sometimes you have to shoot for the stars and land on the moon, and that's okay. And so, in my head, I was becoming a professional cyclist. I was going to go to the Olympics. I was going to win the Tour de France and everything in between. And, of course, I was a product of my generation, right? The riders that we idolized, the ones we read about in magazines, because the internet wasn't much of a thing back then. They were all GC riders. The best Americans were GC riders. And so that's what we all aspired to be. And being an American in a Eurocentric sport, I think we don't necessarily realize how many disciplines within the sport of cycling there are, and how, the season emphasizes those different sort of versions throughout it, even if it's all sort of part of one world tour, campaign.
Right.
So by the time I actually got over to Europe and started racing, I realized that some of the things I was more suited to, that I grew up with, the rain, short, punchy climbs, crappy tarmac. We have really rough chip seal here and lots of gravel roads.
Yeah.
Those things ended up lending themselves more towards racing the classics than anything else. And even before I was sort of more firmly based in Europe, I'd sort of realized that my best asset was being the sprinter who could get over the climbs. And so if I could get to the finish line with a smaller, reduced group, I could be the quickest guy left. But as my career progressed and I, joined bigger and bigger teams, of course, your role changes. And so one of the biggest shifts and maybe hardest things to accomplish in my career was going from, one of the leaders of the team to one of the domestiques on the team, and being not just satisfied with that role change, but being good at it. So I don't think it was as difficult for me to sort of find satisfaction in that role. It was more difficult to hone in on what makes someone really good at that, and how do I, embody that? How do I improve at that? And that took time to cultivate, but it happened.
Tell us about some of the teams. You've been on some impressive teams through the years. Tell us about some of those teams, and maybe what was your favorite team to ride on?
Oh, yeah, that's tough. I mean, I certainly found a home on Trek Segafredo and felt like not just that I was part of the team, but I was part of the kind of core group of riders that made up that team, if that makes sense. It was, we're all contributing something to create and manifest the team. And I felt like I was part of that group. So certainly some of my best experiences come from my time on Trek Segafredo. In terms of, it's really difficult. I think I really appreciated every team I rode for, because I learned a lot each step of the way. And I was quite late actually to go from, second division to first division, or whatever you want to call it, Pro Continental to World Tour.
Yeah.
I was 28 at the time, I think, something like that. And that's pretty late, especially today's standards, where most folks are 18. So I wasn't going to make that shift unless it was a really, the right situation. But it also means that I think in my career, I made really steady, even progress every year to get to where I ended up. And I'm glad that I had that progression as opposed to sort of maybe a more logarithmic curve where, I got really good really fast and then really had to fight to make any progress later on. It made me appreciate each step that I made in a way that I don't think I otherwise could have. It's easy to sort of, when you end up on those higher level teams, dismiss the lower level teams that exist or that you've ridden for. And I never felt that way. I'm incredibly grateful for Danny Van Hout being willing to take a risk on me and hire me on Jelly Belly, back in 2008. If he hadn't taken that risk, I don't know that there would have been a path forward for me. So, a little bit off topic, but one of the things I find so heartbreaking about road racing in America now is those opportunities don't exist as much. They're much fewer and far between, and so those kids that had dreams similar to mine or have dreams similar to mine, where do they go? Where are they going to find that path? And of course, if you're an uber talented, 16-year-old, you can go over to Europe with a national team. And, if you're lucky, 18, 19 years old, you get picked up by a world tour team. But then you've also missed this portion of your career that helps you develop, not just as a rider, but as a person.
Yeah.
And that's really important. I changed as a person in those first, 5 years of pro racing. And that was equally as important as my development as a rider.
Yeah. I mean, that education in those 5 years is priceless, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So in a way, I miss and appreciate the days when I got 3 racing kits for the season and, they mailed me a ticket, literally like in the mail, got a ticket. And that was your invitation. Like, you've been selected for the race, show up and give your all every time. And there, was something beautiful about that version too. And of course, on UHC, I got to be leader on that team and really kind of help dictate what our goals were. And so that was incredibly satisfying in its own way. And I got to lean on my teammates, I think, in a way that I didn't experience elsewhere in my career, since I needed them to perform my best. It created a really intimate bond where I had great appreciation for those individuals, and I saw them selling out for me, and it made me want to do better as an athlete. I remember when I went to Trek, when I was sort of in negotiations with them about coming to the team, I said, "Look, I'm going to let you in on a secret. If you want the most out of Kiel, the way to do that is to make it so that the team needs me. If the team is relying on me, and whether that's them selling out for me or for my leader to need me, above and beyond that day, like that's how you leverage me as an asset." And it was, I think it still remains true actually to this day. And it was, maybe I divulged too much about myself in that moment, but it's accurate.
That's a great.
Teamwork is what makes the sport beautiful. Rowing's the same way. If you're rowing in an 8-person shell, it's all about how smooth you are, how in tune with each other you are. Like you can't go into a race, a bike race or a regatta, rowing, and not be in sync with your teammates, because otherwise you will not perform to the same level. And when the summation of the parts is greater than when the summation of the individuals is less than the result, that's when you've done something great.
Yeah, that's cool. So then let's talk about this next transition, which is from road cyclist to gravel cyclist. So we all have been watching over the past 5 to 8 years this gravel boom. You've settled in with Trek Segafredo in a very comfortable position. You're a solid domestique for the team. What happened that pulled you out of that into the gravel scene?
Yeah. Multiple factors. Like everything, the answer is convoluted and nuanced, but I think primarily kids. My oldest daughter started kindergarten this year, and I didn't want to be in a situation where we were either sort of full time in Europe or we were bouncing back and forth. The full time in Europe thing, of course, would have been great for the kids. Learn another language. Be exposed to school over there. But I wasn't okay with being away from family that much. Where I'm from, I like to say I'm of this place. I'm not from this place, and that's how much home means to me. So being near family or away from family just didn't feel like an option. So that was a huge contributing factor. COVID sort of maybe exacerbated some of my feelings around that. We were gone in Europe, stuck over there, and our families couldn't come join us like the way they had prior. The time away from home just increased exponentially, and there was a lot more anxiety, of course. So maybe that meant I stopped a year or two earlier than I would have otherwise. But the other factors were that I felt less, as I got older, I felt less sort of satisfaction, I got less oomph out of just racing for results, whether that meant, myself or for the team, mostly for the team. That felt like less of a win than being connected to the cycling community, going for a group ride where you met new people and heard about their experiences and had shared experiences and connected and had relatable experiences. It's so hard to explain to someone who hasn't done it what racing in Europe and the World Tour is like. And people like to ask, of course, what was it like in the Dauphiné going up that climb? The reality is I can't explain it to you in a way that will make any sense. Like we're over there, we've trained a silly amount of time for it. We have the fitness for it. We have a chef who's cooking food for us. We have a bus that drives us around. We're staying at hotels, and it just more and more started to feel like a bubble. And I couldn't, when I was inside that bubble, I didn't feel like I could relate to anything outside that bubble. And so gravel presented this opportunity to say, hey, you can still be involved with bikes. You don't have to make a hard left turn and, extricate yourself from bikes entirely. You can still be in it, but in this really different way where what's valued is also kind of like over here instead of over here. And gravel, of course, is a changing landscape. And so when I began to sort of mull over this idea of making a transition, the criteria I had, and where gravel were at aligned differently than they do today. And so I ended up having a much more difficult time with the transition than I thought away from professional cycling. It seemed to me that I had the tools, right? I'd gone to school. I have tons of other passions. I have friends outside the sport. I've got family support. All those things are here for me. This transition, I'm going to be fine. But then in reality, what happened was, there's this huge sense of loss. Your identity is as an athlete, and suddenly, that's taken away, even though it's by choice. And so you feel, this sort of mourning for the loss of your identity. And then on top of that, the thing that I was getting into, this gravel space, it was shifting out from underneath me. What is cool in gravel isn't the same as it was a year ago. And all of a sudden it's a lot more competitive, and, there's money on the line, and there's, the events aren't just individual events. There's now, a series, a year-long series with points, and more sponsors are interested in what everyone's doing. And so navigating those changes as I was trying to navigate, the changes going on inside myself was, a real challenge. That said, I'm glad I stopped when I did. I think it was the right call for me. And it also allowed me to go to remind myself that in this space, in this new gravel, arena, I am not looking to take what I was doing and translate it to gravel. I intentionally stepped away from road racing. I had the choice, and I made the choice. And so this needs to be different. Not just it can be different, but it needs to be because I chose for it to be. And that's been a good reminder.
Yeah. Kiel, cycling can sometimes be a dangerous sport. Crashes, accidents, close calls, bonks, etc., like that first crit you did way back.
Yeah.
I'm curious on both road and gravel. Have you had any close calls?
Sure. Yeah, tons. I mean, just riding to school yesterday to pick up my kids, I had a close call with a car. It's,
Oh, really?
yeah, it's tough, right? We are incredibly exposed as cyclists on the roads. And of course we're riding on open roads, and there needs to be a give and take. There needs to be education, but, certainly the dangers of the sport are something I thought more and more about as I got older, especially having kids. I felt it when we had our first daughter. By the time we had our second daughter, I was really becoming more and more risk adverse.
Yeah.
And I certainly had some, hard crashes, plenty of concussions and stitches. I must be lucky. I have dense bones or something because I never broke a bone. But I do think that during my time on Trek, I was the only athlete that can say that.
Wow. So no, you don't have any hardware in your body.
I don't have any hardware in my body, but I watched a lot of friends get really hurt, and it was certainly a contributing factor in my decision. And one of the things that was such a draw.
Your collarbones, both your collarbones are good?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I know my grandma on my mom's side had really high bone density.
Wow.
But other than that, I don't really have a good reason.
That's incredible. Good for you. I'm into. I think I've got 6 screws in my body right now.
Yeah, yeah. I have friends with plenty of bad injuries. I've seen it all.
Yeah, yeah. Well, cool. That's a super fun transition from road to gravel, and I'm super excited to watch what happens next. Kiel, let's switch gears to sort of the last chapter of our show, which is talking about community and giving back. And you've had an amazing career on the bike. I'm curious, what are some of the areas that are really important to you off the bike that you like to donate your time or energy to?
Yeah, so I think at its most basic level, like I mentioned, just having relatable experiences that I can share with other cyclists in the community, whether that's, this community here where I live or the greater cycling community, that's hugely important to me. So it's as simple as going to one of these gravel events and hosting a, shakeout ride the day before the event and getting to meet a handful of people. Sometimes they bring their kids. Those experiences are super meaningful. Another one I could think of is this year I did Rebecca's Private Idaho with my daughter, and we got to meet some of the para athletes there. And these, in particular, Kai and Meg, they were just amazing people doing amazing stuff, and getting to share that with my daughter too that's what it's all about. Like at its fundamental boiled down kind of level, that's what's meaningful.
Sure, inspiring others.
Yeah, being inspired and inspiring others, and then when it comes to more sort of direct efforts, I partnered this year with World Bicycle Relief for that event, as well as kind of moving forward. So at Rebecca's Private Idaho, when I did that ride with my daughter, we were raising funds to get kids bikes in Africa so that they can ride to school. And it all felt really relatable because my daughter's starting kindergarten. Our goal was to raise funds for 22 kids to get on bikes because that's how many kids were in her kindergarten class.
Oh, that's awesome.
And again, it's another way to kind of relate what we're doing, specifically to my daughter in that case. When she steps into class, she can look around and go like, that's how many kids now get to go to school. And I think it's hard, like even for an adult, right? We can consciously articulate that, but it's hard for us to even understand what that really means until you go and see it. And, I have 10 bikes in my well house. I don't have a garage, I have a well house. And, for some people, just having one bike during their life is life changing. That's crazy to think about. And so, sometimes we need to kind of have a reality check and remember that. So that was a great cause to put some effort behind, and I'll be continuing to do that with those folks. Some really amazing people over at World Bicycle Relief, and Kemi over there set all that up and just was a really fantastic ambassador, and looking forward to doing some more with him in the future.
That's great. Yeah, I noticed the World Bicycle Relief logo on your sleeve there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So just really amazing what they're doing. And then sort of more locally, a couple years ago, we started a cyclocross team. I did not pick the name. It's Kiel Reijnen All Stars, which was just more than my ego could bear. But it was about getting some of the local kids who were into bikes together and giving them an umbrella to race under, making sure they're getting to races and having the support that they needed, a little bit of coaching, awesome. That kind of thing. And we sort of started that in conjunction with an indoor cycling studio here on the island. And I wanted to give those kids a safe space to ride. It gets dark incredibly early here, in the wintertime, like 3:45. So the kids get out of school and they don't really have a chance to ride outside in the light. And so an indoor training studio for them in the winter seemed like an obvious choice. And then the pandemic hit. And so that sort of all fell apart and got dismantled. Doesn't mean it can't be redone, but it was a good exercise for me, I think, to see like, okay, if we put some of these pieces together, this is what we can accomplish in this amount of time with this amount of funds. So every experience like that is a really good education in what it takes to put forth a meaningful effort and have good change. The other kind of big news around here is a 10-acre lot was donated to the Parks Department to build a mountain bike park on the island. Ooh. And so I've been involved with that effort. We built a pump track a few years back up at Battle Point Park on the north end of the island, which was a really great resource for kids to use. It still gets used a ton. So we want to expand on that. And this piece of property is a huge opportunity for the local cycling community to do so. It's like a mile from the high school, middle school, intermediate school. It's a mile and a half from downtown. And we've got more and more sort of a web of trails on the island now. I think there's more than 30 miles of trail on the island now.
Amazing.
That's multi-use and kind of cyclocross-ish trails. Yeah. Very accessible. Most people live, within a quarter mile of one of those trails to get onto the system, and they don't all connect. You have to use roads to connect them. But it makes like riding to that bike park, for example, just a lot more possible for a lot more people. So, once that bike park is up and off the ground, then I think we'll be looking to enhance ways to get to it, whether that's bike lanes on the road or more trails to get there.
Cool. Kiel, we are almost out of time here, but if our listeners wanted to follow along in your adventures or some of these community projects that you're involved in, where might they follow along?
Yeah, so I guess just because we finished up on it, I'll start with it. The bike park, Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance is the company that will be doing the build out. And so on their webpage, there's a link to that particular project. For myself, Instagram, Twitter, Kiel Reijnen, just my name, Kiel Reijnen, is the easiest way to follow along what I'm doing. And then, of course, at the Trek Factory Race Shop website, there is a portion dedicated to the Driftless team. And you can hear about what we're up to on that website, some kind of more full-length features there and longer form pieces.
Cool. And of course, World Bicycle Relief at worldbicyclerelief.org.
Yeah. I don't have the handle that was specifically for the fundraiser that Emmy and I did, but
No worries.
it all goes to the same place.
Yeah, we'll put some of these links in the show notes below, so stay tuned for that. Well, Kiel, it's been an honor, and I'm super thankful and blessed that you joined us today in the studio, and want to wish you great luck in the future, and look forward to seeing you soon at a ride camp somewhere.
Yeah, thanks for having me on and letting me talk a little bit about what I've been up to. I think, if I can leave everyone with one last intention, it's just, connect with each other, and the bike can be that great connector. So we all get to share that, and the more people we share it with, the better it will be.
Well said. I'm not going to follow up with anything after that. Thanks a ton, Kiel. Have an awesome rest of your day.
Great chatting, you too.